To have faith in God is not a stagnant state, it's a journey. As believers, we should grow in our knowledge of God and His Word. Walk with Alan Cutting and many other believers as we walk the believer's journey.
Welcome to the Believer's Journey. I want to thank everyone for joining us today. I want to thank all of you who support us with your finances, who support us in watching our program, in subscribing to our program. And I want to thank everyone who actually writes comments and writes letters and asks me questions on my emails as well as YouTube. And I don't know how you get my messenger, but I know a lot of you are getting me on Messenger too. But thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And I hope I'm getting back to all your questions and answers and comments. I also want to thank our sponsors, Guerrero CPA, Guerrero Law, and Trade Show Displays for all your support, and appreciate everything you do. I do want to make a little plug right now. We do have a GoFundMe campaign going right now to help people in Pakistan who can't afford a lot, and we want to give food baskets or food boxes to families at Christmas time. And we're trying to reach 100 families. These last 2 years, we've done 50 families, and we were trying to push for 100. And they're $30 a box. And if you've got $30 or you've got $300, however it is, we really solely appreciate it. Every single cent will go to the families. Okay, I just want to push that in. Well, anyway, we have a pretty interesting guest today, and we have a pretty interesting topic, and we're going to talk about later on in our program obedience and the multiplication effect. With us is Sarassa Inglis,
yeah,
and she is with the Ransom Life, Ransom, and we'll be talking about their ministry, and what they do is they work with children or people as far as trafficking. And so go ahead. It's nice to have you.
Thank you for having me. Yeah, so I'll just talk a little bit about Ransom Life and what we're doing. And this year is actually special for us because it's our 10-year celebration. We launched in 2015. And for those that aren't familiar with Ransom Life, we're a faith-based nonprofit here in Bexar County. We serve Bexar County and the surrounding communities as well. And our vision really is to see our communities free from child sexual exploitation. And so we actually fall on the front end of that with our prevention. And then we also fall on the aftercare side with our restoration services, with counseling and mentoring, working directly with the families that have been impacted by trafficking.
You know, it's interesting. So the Believer's Journey, we actually belong to and are a sponsor for the 1,000 Beacons of Light, which one of their sectors that they work on is trafficking, preventing trafficking and working with education and children. So we have an interest in actually what you do.
Yeah.
So I find it interesting. We don't get a lot of people who are executive directors or CEOs or, directors of these missions, these parachurch groups like yours, that actually have Bible degrees. So I was reading your bio, and I noticed you have a minor in religion.
Yes.
Which is kind of cool because I think that will help in our discussion today.
Yeah.
But I also noticed if you go to the website for Ransom Life, and it's ransomlife.org, right?
RansomLifeTexas.org.
Texas.org.
Correct, yeah.
And you can go there and look it up and look at about the About Us. And what surprised me with all of your different areas that you work with, and it's not like we work with this problem and that problem and this problem and that problem, and please help us with those problems. What I'm noticing is that we have standards and we have biblical standards that we stand on to work with this problem, and this biblical standard to work on that problem. And it's actually, in my opinion, very biblical based. It's not just we want to help trafficking only. It's that we have a vision and a mission that represents honoring God as we do these things.
Yeah.
Go ahead and speak to that.
Yeah, so when we launched, we launched really out of a need of a young lady that had been trafficked. And it was her mom and counselor that got together and formed Ransom Life. And we have always been prayer led and constantly covering our organization in prayer. We know that ultimately true healing is going to come through a relationship with Jesus Christ. And so it is hard to do our work. It's a very difficult topic. And, being in the trenches with them and counseling and mentoring and walking through some of really the darkest trauma that people can experience. We have to depend on Jesus for that healing and for that restoration. And so that's been foundational of who we are at Ransom Life. And so we built our values around it and our staff, and really is just the culture of Ransom Life and the work that we do.
Yeah, I truly believe in that. So the Believer's Journey, we go to Moldova. We try to go every year. And I don't know if you've heard of, but there's a group, and they, for a long time, they worked with girls, but they also work with boys. Simon's House for the boys, and I just lost the name. But they actually work with girls for to prevent them from going into trafficking. Okay. And I happened to be teaching at the Bible seminary, and for a year or two, I had a student there who is now a pastor. And at one point, he was a co-pastor at somebody's house. Oh, well, anyway, he had asked me to come there and preach. And I had no idea what it was, where it was. I just said, what's the age group? And he said, about, 16 to 28. I go, really? That's an awfully young group. Actually even said 14 on. So out there, and there was like 80 girls there. And what it was is that they have these houses, and they're in undisclosed areas. And they probably house about 30 of them in one 3-story house, And they have a pastor, and so they basically protect these girls from going into being trafficked, and they do it based on a biblical basis. I think there was a church in South Carolina that was had the main ministry to start this, and it's a worldwide known ministry. And I think you're very right. You need biblical. You need healing from Jesus. It doesn't come just because you bring them from the escape of being trafficked. Yeah. And I think it's to watch these. What they did was they brought them up until they were of age to go into university, or 18 to go into the university or go into college or a career. And they literally helped them either do one of the three until they were done with that and they were on their own. And I thought, that's impressive, because even at 17 or 18 and they go out on their own, and what do? You're on your own. You still have a lot of situations where you can get in trouble or be taken if you don't have a goal and you have something set before you. Yeah.
No, and I'm glad you brought that up, because we historically, until last year, we served 11 to 18-year-olds. And so we expanded our age up to 24 because we were seeing that 18 to 24 age where it's like society tells you you're an adult, but really your frontal lobe isn't fully developed. And especially with the group that we work with trauma, a lot of times they're captured at that age that the trauma took place. And so we had a lot of that 18 plus coming back to us saying, I still need help. I still need services. I still need counseling. And so we expanded up to that age of 24 just to be able to help support them further. And so it's a big topic. And I think a lot of people have just kind of a misconception of trafficking or exploitation only happens in a certain area of town, or it only happens to a certain demographic of kids. And really the expansion of media and social media and the internet has changed that. So if you have a cell phone, if you have access to a cell phone, you're at risk to being trafficked and to being groomed. And unfortunately, it's that simple. And so on our prevention side, we're really trying to push that prevention message to be able to protect as many kids as possible.
Yeah. Well, I just remember this was called Stella's House. Now they've changed the name to Stella's Voice. And so that's the ministry that I worked with in Moldova. And but there was a movie out 2 years ago about child trafficking and exploitation down in Colombia.
Sound of Freedom.
Yes.
Sound of Freedom. Yeah.
Yes. And I remember all the criticism it got from a lot of the world.
Yeah.
And but yet I have a feeling that a lot of that, and it's hard to know what's real when you see movies. It really is.
Yeah.
However, Jim, this man, he's a pretty okay guy, I think.
Yeah.
I've read a lot about him after he did Passion of Christ, and he's done a lot of things he's Catholic. He's done a lot of things based on, what is going to honor Jesus.
Yeah.
Notice that. And I think that this movie is really important because I think it gives you the dirt. That's a good way to say it.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it brought a lot of awareness. We tried to follow up on that movie because people were very interested in it. It brought a lot of awareness and trying to talk about, okay, what does that look like here in the U.S., in Texas, in San Antonio, in your backyard, in your community, is really how we followed up that movie and that awareness that it brought, and just kind of layered on top of that, like, okay, what does it really look like here? It's happening in our backyard. It's happening down the street. It's in our church. It's in our school. And so trying to bring more awareness to us locally too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. One of the key things I believe in situations like this one here in child exploitation is healing. Mm-hmm. And now I noticed that your ministry works with healing with these kids. Mm-hmm. How does that take place? What do you do? I mean, because for me, saving children from exploitation or trafficking is one thing. But there's a lot of garbage that is in there and down in there that without healing will be there when they go out and about.
Yeah. So we approach it really in two different ways. So we have our counseling program and our mentor program. Our counseling program is professional, trauma-trained, trauma-focused counselors. So the goal of our counseling is to dive into that trauma, so that we can get to the healing part. And it takes a long time, especially when you're working with minors and youth, and sometimes they're not ready to fully process their trauma, which is why it's interesting. We had them coming back to us after they turned 18. They were now adults, and they're like, I need to come back and talk through some of this other trauma that's resurfaced. So we have our counseling program, which is obviously mental health. It's professional trained counselors to walk through that mental health piece with them. And then our mentor program is trained volunteers that we train at Ransom Life. And the goal of that program is all relationship. So essentially it's a wraparound support to our counseling program. So they're getting the mental health healing with their counselors, and then the mentors are able to supplement that and build relationships with them. It's like I mentioned earlier, we believe healing is going to happen in the context of relationships, specifically in the context of a relationship with Jesus. But our mentors being able to have those relationships help build trust again in humanity, help build trust in another person that's not going to hurt them and that's going to love them for who they are, where they're at, with no condition, allows us to then introduce them to the love of Jesus.
So how does Ransom Life, how do they function before all the healing, when you come out to children where they actually need help? How do you get connected with those children? How does that work to where you are able to take them in and actually where do they live at that point?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we we are a community-based service. So the kids that we work with typically are still living at home, or potentially with like a foster parent if they're in the foster care system, or a guardian. So their aunt, uncle, but they are typically living at home. But about 60% of our referrals come from Bexar County Juvenile Probation. So we work very closely with Bexar County, and they get screened when they come into juvenile probation. And depending on how they score on that screening for exploitation and trafficking, then they get referred to us for services. And I'll touch on that just a little bit because we get the question a lot. What are they doing in juvenile? Like, why are they getting caught up in the juvenile system? And it really depends on the youth, but a lot of times it's situations they're caught up with the wrong crowd, or potentially they're acting out their trauma. And so they've gotten in fights or something like that at school, and then they end up in the juvenile system. And so we work with them after that. So typically they are living at home when we're working with them.
Okay.
Yeah.
I know that working with Stella's voice in Moldova, I know that it seems the problem there is that, well, it's a whole different world in Moldova. The income level is really hard. I mean, to work in a city, you make about $300 a month, but your cost of living is $1,000.
Yeah.
So there's a real problem. So you have a parent or both leave the country in order to make a living, they can sustain a living and send money back.
Yeah.
Then the child ends up, without one or both parents, and they end up living with an aunt and uncle or a grandparent, or they put them off into an orphanage.
Mm-hmm.
And when that happens, and they're susceptible for trafficking,
right?
Just because they're a parent there, it's a really very tough situation.
Yeah.
And and orphanages aren't always known for the safest place.
Yeah.
So, but it was interesting though, if they're home, how that's a volatile situation.
Yeah, it's an interesting dynamic. Some come from good homes where the parents involved, and then I would say most probably come from a broken home of some sort. And so we do get quite a few youth that are living with their guardian, maybe not like their biological parent, but another, like a kinship family member that they're living with.
Yeah.
But we also understand the importance of the entire family unit. And so a part of our counseling, we also offer to the family as well. So once the child is enrolled in counseling with us, then their guardian, their siblings can all receive individual counseling as well. So we do the individual and the family counseling. And really, we just know that trauma did not just happen in an isolated event with the one child. Most of the time, the family has experienced trauma from that. And so being able to help unite and heal the entire family just kind of helps make that move faster.
So how are you funded? I mean, obviously this isn't cheap.
It is not cheap. I know. We talk all the time. Our counseling, we offer at no cost to the families. All the time, like everyone knows, counseling is not cheap. It's expensive. And so we are funded through different foundations and grants, as well as individual donors. So we have a few events during the year that we do, but then we also just have individuals or businesses that partner with us monthly, or do a one-time gift that fund us. And so we do pursue the grants and the foundations, but we also have a big piece of it, which is individual donors as well. So
healing. Okay. So healing is a big factor. And I believe that, I come from a broken home, and a very, very dysfunctional home.
Yeah.
And so I knew that when I didn't figure out that I needed actual healing from all of that garbage until I was in my 20s. It took a while. I mean, and I didn't go to a counselor. I had a pastor who kind of was my mentor, but I, at one point, decided I needed to really work on this, and I decided to do it on my own and got books and read and talked to pastor here and there. And the healing that I realized had to come, but really the healing that I felt would only happen is if it was actually through Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, how do you see that, and how do you work with what you have?
Yeah, so we have to tread lightly, I guess, in the sense of because our counselors are professional licensed counselors and they have ethics, they cannot be the child's pastor type figure. They are, solely their counselor. But when they get recommended to receive services from us, part of the intake portion is if they want to receive Christian counseling.
Okay.
And so there's a box that they can check. So I guess I want to say they do not have to be believers in order to receive services from us.
Okay.
We are serving any and all people. But they have that option. And if they check that box, then they want Christian counseling. Then we can pray with them in the counseling sessions and bring in Bible verses and all of that into the counseling sessions, which is, it's helpful. And then on the mentoring side, the same thing. So if they're in our mentor program, it is all youth led. So we ask them if they would like to be prayed for, would they want to go to church, obviously making it an option and not saying we're going to do this, but just meeting them where they're at and loving them with the love of Jesus. And a lot of times we see them question that because they've never experienced an unconditional love. A lot of times they have the love is conditional in a lot of their past instances. And so really it's just meeting them where they're at, loving them with the love of Jesus. And then they start asking why do you keep showing up? You're a volunteer. You don't have to do this.
Yeah.
Why do you pick me up and support me? And
oh, I get that.
Yeah.
I get that because, when you're on the broken end, it's like, why do you do this? And because they're not used to it.
Right.
Why do you do this? My mom didn't do this. My dad didn't do this. My friends didn't really do it. They weren't really good friends. People took advantage of me, hurt me, this and that, and so forth. So what makes you different? What's your angle?
Yeah.
Oh, I see that. I totally do.
Yeah. And so I originally started at Ransom Life as a mentor in 2015 when we launched. And probably a few months into mentoring a young lady, she just point blank asked me, what any different than any other person that's been in my life, which kind of took me by surprise a little bit. And so I just told her, I said, look, I'm committed to you. I'm committed to this relationship, and I'm going to be here for you as long as you want to be in this relationship, and I'm going to support you and love you. And now once you say that, obviously you got to mean it. You can't just drop out of their lives like other people have. So I think that was a pivotal point, like in our relationship, because she was trying to figure out if she could trust me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I think that a lot of people, on our end of things as, facilitators, pastors, teachers, we say things like that. And then, we walk away, and, there's a lot of misunderstanding on our end of what real commitment and covenant really is.
Yeah. We train a lot on that in our mentor training. I have a huge problem with people who are in our position who basically give these kind of promises and they're empty. I have a real problem with that because that just makes it worse. Yeah. So, it can hurt them worse. And most of the time the clients that we work with can see through all of that. Yeah. And we tell our mentors that, like, and sometimes you got to be genuine and honest and show up. And even if they don't show up, you're there. Yeah. You made the commitment. You show up.
I mean, I was really fortunate. I wrote in a book one time on leadership. I wrote a chapter. There's like 30 different leaders. And so I wrote my chapter. It's not a Christian book at all, but I wrote my chapter on investing. It was like a servant leader. You've heard the term servant leadership. I don't know if I like the term, but it was about investing and how a good leader, can be a good leader just because they are there and they do good leadership. But a great leader is someone who invests their life in somebody to make that person grow and become all that they can be.
Yeah.
And so I talk about investing because in my life, I had a pastor. I've talked about him several times on this program. His name was Lon Ekdahl. He's in Oregon, and he was my pastor when I was 16 years old when I became a Christian. And he's been like my surrogate father.
Yeah.
And he's been my mentor. But what I remember, what really hit it was when I was in high school. I mean, my dad was in Canada somewhere, and my mom was always gone. Never really paid attention to what I did in school. I mean, but he would show up at my football games. I played football. Or he would show up. I was also in the choir. A lot of his football players were in the choir.
Yeah.
So we did certain concerts, and he would show up to those.
Yeah.
I thought, at first it was like, well, it's just a football game. But when he shows up to the concert, I'm like, well, who does that?
Yeah.
Who wants to do that unless you're a parent?
Yeah.
And I thought, this is really cool. But then it got to be the point where when I did something dumb or stupid, he would be there to also correct me.
Yeah.
And one time I did something really stupid and I hit somebody, and I walked over to him and he said, "So you feel like you're a big man, huh?" Oh man, I felt this big. So basically he was there.
Yeah.
There for both sides, for everything. And today he's like my biggest, fan.
That's
and
awesome.
He's amazing. We flew him out here and he did 2 programs, and we've done one with him and his wife last year. And
That's awesome.
he talks about obedience. I mean, he's a big,
Yeah.
he's big on that.
Yeah.
And so he just wrote a book called Trust and Obey. There's no other way. And so, but it was because he invested his time into my life.
Yeah.
Not that he gave his spare time,
Right.
but he invested his time.
Yeah.
And when I needed him, he was there. If I did something stupid, he was there. When I did something great, he was there. When I wasn't sure about something, he was there.
Yeah.
So in that respect, handing it back to you, tell me about how you perform all this.
Yeah. Well, and I think to touch on that, one of our founders would always say it's the power of presence. Like you are there, you're present, you're committed. And so me personally, is that what you're asking?
Well, you and Ransom Life. I mean, this is all part of.
Yeah. So my story into Ransom Life was, which I think we'll touch on a little bit later, but really God asking me to step into this and me obeying, not fully knowing what it would look like exactly. And so a lot of our staff members have a similar story where they feel like God specifically told them, they had called them to this mission and to Ransom Life. And so all of our staff meetings, like I said earlier, we're founded in prayer. We can't do this without prayer and without Jesus. And so I think just emphasizing that as an organization and as a staff, number one, keeps us grounded. But then number two, helps support us, because this is a very hard, dark topic. And our counselors and our mentor team hear it all the time, and it's hard. And so really trying to emphasize self-care and what that looks like so that we can be in it for the long run in order to support the kids and their families for the long run. So we've been putting a big emphasis on that as well, so that we can guard against that burnout, going into the counseling sessions and, putting on the full armor of God before we go into those sessions where we know we're going to hear some pretty hard stuff. So really just approaching it that way has been really helpful for us.
Yeah. Yeah. I like that you say it's about being there, presence. Because I think a lot of times I I've spent several years as associate pastor in churches, and I've spent several more years as a Bible teacher at places, in schools and university. And so basically, it was when I was there that I think made a difference. Sometimes I didn't really have to say a lot, but I was there. And I think that learning as a youth pastor was interesting because, there's kids that are hungry for adult. They don't say the supervision, but it's adult love,
attention,
somebody there who's there. And I understood this because I understood what I wanted as a teenager, and I didn't have. So when I was a teenager, when I was a youth pastor, I would do things like I knew certain kids needed that extra touch, that extra, that may be a weird way to say that, an extra time to play. So I would meet with some and say, hey, you want to play handball or basketball or throw a baseball or do something? Let's go to McDonald's, and we talk. So I did this, and I did it a few times a week as ministry, part of as being a youth pastor. And this is above and beyond my job of let's have activities and teach Bible studies. This was just the personal, let's meet. And I saw this growth. And what's really fascinated is that I have kids they're no longer kids, then who now are pastors of churches. I have a pastor, his name is Jeff Love. He's so funny, Dr. Jeff Love, Dr. Love. And he pastors a live church in Tucson. I have, other pastors, people who are under my care that I spent time with. I spent a lot of time with him, and others who are worship leaders and so forth. And I really see this as something when I spent time with certain individuals, that extra time after school, that extra time talking to them, or even with their family, these kids turned out above and beyond the rest. It's like they really reached their goal. And I see that, and I think it's a phenomenal thing.
Well, and it's interesting to I guess kind of flip it, like traffickers and groomers know that as well. Like they know that kids need that attention and that they want that attention and they want a mentor. And so they become that in order to like earn the trust. And so that's why we're passionate about both sides, the restoration side, but then also the prevention side, and trying to educate our community, but also raise up trusted adults in our community that can be that person. Like everyone knows a child, or they have some sort of interaction with a child, even if it's their second cousin or, and so we talk about it all the time, be that trusted adult, because if y'all aren't going to be that trusted adult, the groomers are coming in and they're going to try and be that person in their life. And so we've got to, as a community, get ahead of that, and be able to be a trusted person.
There's a couple of years ago, we had a guest on our program. Her name is Mandy Majors.
Yes.
You know who she is?
Yes.
Oh, phenomenal.
Yeah.
She really brought up the fact that parents need to invest in their children and spend time with them and teach them and get questions from them and ask them questions. And that there's a bond there that she really taught this program, and people who listen taught them what it was to safeguard your children. Because you're investing in them and they know that. I was totally impressed with her, and totally what she had to say, I think speaks total volume. So,
and it raises kids' self-esteem.
And
all of that. And so it makes them less
and
vulnerable.
trust into their parents. And,
Yes.
And I think that's really cool. So, but
it's all tied together.
So let me ask you, so in if somebody wanted to be a part of, volunteer or promote or support Ransom Life, what would they do?
So I would say the easiest thing is go to our website. So ransomlifetexas.org. Not only do we have, I'll talk on the support volunteer side, but we also have the other side where we have a parent page. We have a page for youth. We have some of our presentations on demand. So there's a ton of information. We call it our knowledge hub. So if you're interested at all in this topic or what we're doing, the Knowledge Hub is where it's at. You can find lots of information, especially if you're a parent. This can be a very intimidating topic. And so we have tips and resources for parents on our website, but also on our website. So our volunteer opportunities, our mentors are volunteers. So not our counselors, but our mentors. And so we're always looking for more mentors to support the kids that we have. Our prevention education. So we have 2 staff members that are focused on our prevention education. But then we also have a group of volunteers that are the ones going out in the community, doing the training, doing the presentations. So we have presentations for youth as well as caregivers and adults. So if you love to talk to people, you can come be one of our presenters on the education side. And then, of course, there's always, like I mentioned, this year we have 2 events. So you can be on our events team and help us with that if you want to volunteer that way. And then support, financial support is always welcome. We're actually doing a campaign this year, which is $10 a month to celebrate our 10 years. Mm-hmm. And so we've been talking, what is an easy thing that you can give up for $10 a month? Like if you love Starbucks, you could give up 1 drink just because they're pricey. But you could give up 1 drink a month in order to support us and see No Child Sold in your community. So that's an easy way. And then I would love to do a plug for, in May, we have an event, which is our prayer breakfast. This is our 4th year doing it. And really the goal of that is to unite our city in prayer around this topic. But it's also a fundraiser. So you would buy a ticket, come have breakfast with us. We're going to have a speaker who's a 30-plus year attorney. She's a pastor. She's a grandmother. She's a mother. She's going to be speaking at our prayer breakfast this year. And so buying a ticket to that.
And when's your prayer breakfast again?
It is in May. So May 8th. And it's at CBC Church at 8 in the morning.
All right. Well, there you have it. But please go to their website. Actually, they have lots of information on there that tells about their program. It seems like you have a big bunch of people that work for you. There's like 9, I thought I saw.
Yes, we do. We have 7 full-time and 2 part-time.
And so if you have any questions, there's emails. There's a basic email. There's emails for every person you need to speak to if you want to. And there's a phone number. So feel free to contact them. And to me, it's a very worthwhile program. Mm-hmm. It's very important. Obviously, we support that, from our ministry.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, let's get on to our biblical topic, and we'll talk about obedience and the multiplication effect.
Yeah.
So I was looking up scriptures, and it's really interesting. Now, this is your topic, so we're going to get to you, but I was looking up scriptures, and there's a ton of scriptures, Old Testament and New Testament. We think about the New Testament. You mentioned some things in the New Testament, but I went back because I'm a big Old Testament person. Mm-hmm. So I saw lots of things in the Old Testament too, how this works and how God works, even to the fact that God gave a command to Adam and Eve, be fruitful and multiply. Mm-hmm. And this isn't just about having children and going on. It has a lot to do with the very idea of being fruitful is more than just having kids.
Yeah.
It's becoming who you're supposed to be and multiplying that factor also.
Yeah.
I think it's really important. So you start from the beginning, and then we have the parables and the teachings and the actions of Jesus. Mm-hmm. So talk about this a little bit.
Yeah. So I'll just share, I guess, my story, which ties into this multiplication effect and obedience. So when I first started, really in college, I felt like God was calling me to work with sex trafficking survivors. And I had done a few research projects on it, but that was really the first time I had heard about sex trafficking in America. And so when I felt God kind of nudging me that way, I'm like, I have no idea. I have no idea what that means. I don't know what that looks like. Are there organizations even doing this work? And so through a whole series of God events, I eventually found Ransom Life. And so I was going to sign up to be a mentor with Ransom Life. And I was talking to a friend about this, and I kept saying, I don't feel like I'm equipped. I don't know if I have enough to offer. I'm going to be, with someone who has experienced immense trauma, which fortunately enough, I hadn't experienced. And so I felt like I was unqualified, I guess, to be a mentor. And she just shared, she took me back to the Jesus feeding the 5,000, that story. And how essentially the disciples ended up bringing what they had to Jesus, and he took it and he blessed it, and it multiplied to feed 5,000 plus. And so her encouragement to me was, Jesus is not asking you to be all of the things. He's asking you to show up, to be obedient to the calling that he's placed on you, and to come with what you have in your hands. And he's going to take it. He's going to multiply it. He's going to make it to where it's enough and more than enough for not only you, but for the young lady that you're going to mentor. And so that completely just shifted, I guess, my mindset and being like, I don't have enough. I don't know what I'm going to do. And so just really coming with what I had to offer and showing up and being obedient and allowing God to take that and multiply it and impact the life of my mentee, but also really impacting my life just as much in that relationship. So that's how I got to Ransom Life. And then just seeing it throughout life, church, personal, just the steps of obedience and how God uses that and multiplies it. And
it's interesting because I think that in Christendom, worldwide, the whole idea of obedience is somewhere lost. It's, we all want to be saved. We all want to go to heaven. We all want to be raptured. We all want all these little nice things, and we all want it in a package. And we all real easy, and we want to say, well, we don't have to do anything. We have all the key words we say, which half of it isn't true, or most of it. Yeah. And we skip things like we need to abide, we need to remain, we need to obey, we need to follow.
Yeah.
And these things here are huge. And when you go to the scriptures, you find where God's blessings are.
Yeah. They're
with the ones who abided or remained or obeyed.
Right.
And it's amazing. I was looking in, here's 1 Corinthians 3:6. Paul says, I have planted, Apollos watered, and God gave the increase. And I think that hit me like, wow, that's true. Because I talked to a lot of people about, I can't convert them. When I talk to them, they don't accept Jesus. They don't do this. They don't do that. And says, you're not called to do all of that. You're called to do what you're called to do.
Right.
If you're called to plant the seed, you've planted the seed. You've done what God wants you. And then let God work with that to go on. All this said here was that Paul planted, but it was Apollos that watered. But then it was God that gave the increase. And so I think we forget that. And I work with a lot of mission groups in Eastern Europe, a lot of them. And the big thing is about getting people saved. But sometimes, not always, but sometimes the focus is missed about what making a disciple is. They think it's making them saved. And I'm like, no, a disciple is someone who's a follower and a learner. In other words, they're becoming like Jesus. And that's what Jesus said, make disciples, make followers. And that means they need to be following.
Yeah.
And it's really interesting because when I went down the scriptures, like in Deuteronomy, I have to tell you, Deuteronomy 30:16 says, God says, in that day I commanded you this day to love the Lord your God, to walk in his ways, and to keep his commandments and his statutes and his ordinances, that you may live and multiply, and that the Lord your God may bless you in the land where you go in to possess it. In other words, he's emphasizing the connection here between the obedience of God's commands, okay, and the promise of a blessed life and multiplied life.
Yes. And I think a lot of people want the blessing, but they're not willing to be obedient.
Yeah.
And so in both of those verses, obedience comes first, blessing comes later. And so, yeah, I think sometimes too, people get caught up in, I think a lot of people like to control. And the more you control, the more you hold on. And so if God's asking you to do something that doesn't make sense and you don't want to do it, you don't want to step out because you don't want to release that control. And so I've just seen it in my life. Like I had said earlier, even when it doesn't make sense, but you know that God's asking you to do something, step out, obey, have the faith to do it. And then the rest of it kind of unravels. You can see it happening after that.
A perfect example of that, and I even have that scripture here. It's in Matthew, the parable of the talents. Okay, so a guy goes away and he gives 5 talents to one person, 2 talents to another, and 1 to a third person. And the 2 people who take their talents and invest them, let go of them to be invested, they doubled and God blessed them. The one person who held on to it, buried it, and kept it, wow.
Yeah.
I mean, that person got cursed, basically.
Yeah.
And I think it's right. We're so inclined to hold on and control, and we're not learning how to let go and be dependent. We're taught as human type people to be independent,
right?
And
especially in America.
Oh, well, not just America. I mean, if you go to other countries, they're taught to be independent. To we are what we are. Men, we're a man. And that's grained into men for sure, even more than women. But we're taught this independence, and as we get older, that goes against us because as we learn to grow in Jesus, we need to become dependent. And that goes against the grain that we taught as we were growing up. It's really difficult.
Yeah. Well, and I guess kind of what I had mentioned earlier too, like the dependency on God and Jesus to do this work or whatever work he's called you to do is key, but then also having the right people around you to also help support that and push that forward is needed, because like that verse you shared earlier, we're not called to do all of it. Yeah. Maybe I'm just the planter of the seed. And we talk about that a lot at Ransom Life because, when we go and do our presentations and a kid comes up and says, that's my story, and outcries, we might not ever see that kid again. We have no idea, And so it's just like we're planting seeds and someone else is going to water and then God's going to do the work.
Well, and there's even a parable Jesus talks about planting the seed. One will plant, another will, water, another will harvest, another, and so it goes on. And so we have these teachings and it's almost like we ignore them.
Yeah.
I mean, really. And to me, it's like, seriously, are we just going to just blot this one out because we don't want to live it? We don't want to read it. We don't want to follow it.
Or we just want to be comfortable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or we may not totally understand it, so we just kind of ignore it.
Yeah.
One of the problems I really have is that we don't have enough teaching about some of this stuff.
Yeah.
We get very little teaching nowadays about obedience. Very little teaching. And I think that, Jesus says, if you love me, you'll obey me.
Yeah.
He equates obedience with love.
Yeah.
Literally.
Yeah.
And it's like, what happened to us?
Yeah. I think I feel like in today's culture, it's almost like a taboo word, obedience, obey. I don't know. I feel like culture plays a huge, huge role in all of that. But it's not talked about in the Bible how it's going to be easy and you're just going to have this easy journey, but if you're obeying God, truly listening to him, truly obeying, then he's going to do the rest of the work. but you got to get out of your comfort zone. You got to take the step.
I think you're so right. And I think that, when I look at like some of these scriptures I looked at in 2 Kings chapter 4, there's this widow. Okay. She had a husband who was a prophet and he dies. Mm-hmm. Elisha comes along. And so she goes to him and please, hey, I'm broke and I have debtors. These guys are going to take my kids away from me, And so he has her get a bunch of pots and he has them filled through a miraculous miracle, and there was enough to pay the debt and enough for her kids to live on the rest of their life, because it said that she was faithful in obedience. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's really amazing how God multiplied, because of her obedience and faithfulness to God.
Yeah.
Several years ago, we had this big movement in the United States about the prayer of Jabez. Do you remember that? Oh, that he asked for to God to extend his territory. That was a big thing about 10 years ago. And a guy wrote a book about it. We had songs and everything on the churches. And so we would tell people, God will extend your territory. Just ask him. But I went back to read the passage, and it said something very significant. It said that he was a righteous man, and therefore God extended his territory. And I think that what we want to block out is that we need to be righteous. We need to be obedient. We need to be that in Jesus. We need to be part of what he is. And all we do is, well, I'm a Christian. God should do it. Or we have the prosperity movement. Well, I can command for him to do it because I am the heir, and so he should do it just because. And we're not following the actual teachings of Scripture, where it talks about be faithful, be obedient, be righteous, and God will bless you.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I think it goes back to, I don't know, with the multiplication effect, I think it also goes back to God wants people that are going to obey and take a step out, even when they don't feel fully equipped or good enough or all of that, because then when it multiplies, they can point it back to God and say, the only way that this happened was because of God. Like I didn't have enough. I didn't have, but all of this happened because of God.
Yeah. I go, a lot of times I've gone back to King Hezekiah, and if people don't know who he is, he was a king of Judah back in the day with Isaiah. And there's two things significantly that happened in this that fits right in here. Number one, when the Assyrian army was conquering the world at the time, they already conquered Israel, and they're coming down to Judah, and they had them in siege for about a year. And they wrote Hezekiah a letter, we're going to take you, and we're going to do all these terrible things to you like we've done to all these other nations, and we're just going to wipe you out and all this awful stuff. And so he takes the letter, he goes into the temple, and he lays it on the altar, and almost like he's saying, God, this is yours. This is to you. And he prays this prayer about God, how awesome and wonderful and amazing he is. And then he says oh yeah, by the way, this guy wrote this letter. He wants to do these terrible things. And please, can you take care of this and let the world know that you're God?
Yeah.
And then when Isaiah came in later in his life, it says, oh, by the way, the Lord says you're going to die within the week. You need to put your house in order. He says, God, I've been a righteous man. I have followed you, done all these things, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And because of that prayer, God changed his mind. Isaiah came back and he says, okay, God's going to let you live. And he lived 13 more years. Yeah. And this word righteous keeps coming in. The word's obedience keeps coming in. And I think for some reason, we Christian type people of today seem to block that out.
Yeah. I think it just goes back to, I don't know. I think people block it out because they don't want to be uncomfortable. I think that there is and I mentioned America. I think that there is a level of comfort for Christians in America versus maybe some other places in the world where there actively being persecuted. And so I don't know. We talk about it all the time, like step out of your comfort zone.
Yeah.
Take the step.
I mean, think of the disciples, all 12 of them, when Jesus called them, stepped out of their comfort zone.
Out. Yeah.
They literally stepped out of their comfort zone, and they really had a struggle just becoming and living as a disciple, not even counting after Jesus left and as an apostle doing those things.
Because it makes you depend, like what you were talking about.
Yeah.
It makes you depend on him.
Yeah.
So that you're not doing it within your own strength and will.
So I have this thing down here. The Bible teaches that obedience to God's commands is not just a requirement, but a path to blessings and multiplication in all areas of life, both spiritual and physical. Mm. You know, I ran into a guy several years ago who was teaching a Bible study, and he was telling people that he didn't believe we should pray for blessings. He thought it was selfish, and that's nothing that we should do. And, you know, so I had to speak up. Well, that's not true. We need to seek blessing, but we don't just seek it blindly. And as a person who doesn't actively live a life, but we seek it as we live the life. You know, Jesus said, "Ask anything in my name, and I'll do it." Basically, what does it mean in his name? Some people think it's just repeating the words in his name, but it's actually to live like him and become the very thing he is. Like Jesus says, "I do all things in the Father, Father in me," and so forth. And so there's an idea there that means we need to become something more than just a person who wants comfortability. Right. And we can weed out the ideas of obedience and righteousness just because, well, you know, Jesus loves me anyway.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. I would just, I guess, encourage people with whatever it is, just like my friend had encouraged me. And it's not about come volunteer at Ransom Life. No, but just encouraging people to take that step to get out of your comfort zone. Jesus is going to meet you there. You've got to depend on him, and just obey. Do what he might be calling you to do. I think sometimes I talk to people and they're like, well, I've felt like God has asked me to do this for years. It's like, well, do it. Yeah. Do it.
You know, I found, and I have said this to so many people, that if you're faithful to him, he will bless you. Mm. I was told to me when I was a teenager, and I've never forgotten it, and I truly believe it. And I think some people think that doesn't always work when it comes to certain areas of life. Or I had somebody tell me that doesn't seem to work with longevity of life. And I started realizing it has nothing to do with longevity of life. It has everything to do with, you know, completion of life, as far as we live in a complete fullness of life, and God gives us fullness, and we can live in that capacity that honors him greatly. And therefore we have a testimony that speaks to all people in honor of Jesus. That's what I'm talking about. And I think some people take it wrong but I think he blesses us, you know, in all things. You know, when we look for a spouse, you know, if we're faithful to him, you know, then God will bring that spouse around that fits us. Yeah. Same thing with a job or whatever it might be. I think if we're faithful to him, you know, I think God will bless us. Yeah. And I think in this very area, if we're obedient and faithful to him in our obedience, God will bless us.
Yeah. And have patience and trust on his timing.
Well, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, thanks for coming. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
I want to say that in closing, that really look up the scriptures I have here down below in my discussion area, but also look into the Ransom Life here. Go to their website and, you know, pray about, if you're here in Texas or San Antonio, to offer time if you have it, or you have ways of giving to them they can use your support in lots of ways. They're a very admirable, ministry. And I think that, and you'll find that the more you research. Okay.
Yeah. Thank you.
So thank you again.
Yeah.
Everyone, I want to thank you for joining us today. You all have a wonderful day and a wonderful week. Aloha.